Okay, welcome. This is a Wednesday night. We usually don't have a class, but I wanted to finish and complete. We did, and we're not going to finish today. We're going to have one more class on this passage of the Zohar with the interpretation of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, the father of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Kabbalistic genius who was giving this incredible, deeper understanding in this passage of the Zohar. As he has next week is his Yortzeit, and in honor of Chaf Av, which is next week, we're doing in preparation this learning of this passage. We began on Monday night. You listen to class part number 1. Please do not listen to this class until you listen to class number 1. Even if you're on right now live, cancel this class, listen to that, and then catch this one on after it's recorded. Why? Because I'm not going to review what we learned in last class, and you're going to be totally lost unless you listen to part 1. Okay, so that's just important information. This class is only a class 2 study. After you listen to class number 1, find it. It has the same title. It's just called part number 1. Okay, the Zohar that we were just brief. The Zohar speaks about sages that were walking in the desert. It got very hot. They sat down under the shade of a rock. One of the sages, there were 3 sages, Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Chia says to Rabbi Yossi after they sat down at the rock, and Rebbe Lazar said, the shade causes a delight of the soul. Reb Chia says to Rebbe Lazar, can you share with me something about the 21 days of the holidays of from Rosh Hashanah until Shmini Atzeret, which is the final day of Sukkot, the 8th day of Sukkot? Can you share me what is the deeper meaning? So Rabbi Lazar says to him, well, this has been discussed already earlier, so why are you, we discussed it already once. So he says, no, I know that, he says, but I heard something from the great lamp. He says, from the great holy supernal lamp, which meant that I heard from it a teaching from Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, the great master of the Zohar, who he taught me, the piece that we're reading over here, that I'm reviewing, is the first piece on the bottom, on the first page. You see it? Yeah, you have it. So that's the passage of the Zohar, the bigger words on the bottom. But then I'll show you in a moment where we're holding. And so he says to him, I heard from Reb Shimon Bar Yochai a teaching over here, but it was over my head, kind of. I didn't absorb it. It was too lofty. So therefore, I'm asking you, maybe you can kind of explain. So Rebbe Lazar, and I told you last week that this Rebbe Lazar might be the son of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Rebbe Lazar, the son of Reb Shimon, could be, and or unless he's another Rebbe Lazar, another sage in the Mishnah, in the Zohar. And he said to him, he starts explaining him how he gives him a whole mystical teaching about the 21 days. And in brief, first there is Rosh Hashanah, which is God's left hand, which he extends beneath our head. Like it says in Shir HaShirim, Smolo Tachas L'Roishi, God's left hand is beneath our head. So God stretches his left hand out to raise and to draw in Knesset Yisrael, to draw in the Shechina, consequently all the Jewish souls which are part of the Shechina. God extends it on the first 10 days, from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur. And then right after Yom Kippur, God stretches out his right hand, and the mood changes, and therefore in the first 10 days, it's a day of great awe and fear. And then on the days between, from day after Yom Kippur, and especially the holiday of Sukkot, is Hashem's right hand, which is V'yamino Tchapkeni, his right hand embraces us. And God pulls us in with love. And that's why our response during our experience during that time has to be of tremendous joy and celebration. And then finally comes Shmini Atzeres, and Shmini Atzeres is the actual intimacy between God and Israel. And that's basically what's explained by Rebbe Lazar to Rebbe Chia during that time. So in the piece that we were learning the other day, he was explaining the relationship to Reb Chia to the question. He explains how Reb Chia is the same energy like Yoseph, which they are both the energy of Yesod. Yesod is the element of bonding. That's where the idea of an intimacy happens. Shmini Atzeres is the day, and he explained the relationship of Yosef, who is Yesod, to the 8th king. Remember, there were 7 kings who died. Shvirat HaKelim, the shattering of the vessels, related to 8, to the world of Tohu, the collapsed world. But then there is the 8th king, King Hadar, which Yosef is also beautiful because he comes, his root is from that level. And that's the source of Yesod. And Yesod of the world of Tikkun comes from the 8th king of the world of Tohu, where the transition takes place from Tohu to Tikkun, like we discussed in last class. And that's why it's the 8th day. And we also learned the whole idea that we learned how Pesach, Passover, corresponds to Avram. Shavuot corresponds to Isaac, to Yitzchak. Sukkot corresponds to Yaakov. And the last day of Sukkot, which is a Yom Tov on its own, corresponds to Yosef, to Joseph. And Joseph is the attribute of Yesod. And that's why Shmini Atzeres is Yosef's day. And that's what we find. Remember we said that how Yosef said everybody should leave the room because an intimacy has to be in private. When Yosef reveals himself to the brothers. And the Zohar then makes the connection that Yosef is God. Yosef in that story in the story of Yosef revealing himself to his brothers, there is a deeper meaning that it refers to God revealing himself to the Jewish people in a very intimate manner on Shemini Atzeret, on that day. And that's why we know that on Shemini Atzeret, God says, party is over for the nations. It's only me and Israel, only me and the Jewish people. And that's the connection on that day. So he explained how Rabbi Chia is the same energy as Joseph, 1,500 years later, whatever the amount of time is. Rabbi Chia, one of the great sages of the Kabbalah. And that's why his first letter of his name is Ches, related to the 8th day, Shmini Atzeres. And then the rest of the letters of his name, Yud, and Aleph, we learned, is the 21 days leading up to Shmini Atzeres. Because Shmini Atzeres is the 22nd day of the month of Tishrei. So there's a Yud and an Aleph. And Yud, and Aleph is it's really Yud and Yud Aleph. One Yud is the 10 days of the left hand, because you can't get the intimacy until you first have the warming up of the left hand and the right hand. Again, listen to part number 1 to get all the details on this. So there is the first Yud of the word Chia is the 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, which is God's left hand. The second Yud and the Aleph is 11 days. That's from the day after Yom Kippur, from the 11th day of Tishrei, all the way up to the 21st day. So from 11 to 20 to 21, including 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21 is 11 days. That's the other Yud Aleph of the word Chia. We also said that those 3 letters, why? Because you can't get the 8th day, which is Shmini Atzeres, the 8th day of Sukkot. You can't get to the union, to the intimacy, unless you have first the tshuva with the left hand, and then the love, which is the right hand, and that prepares us for Shmini Atzeret, for that union. So in the word Chia, you have the whole 9 yards. And that's the reason also why we also said that, very, very beautiful, the last thing, Yud, and Aleph also stands for Yaakov, Yitzchak, and Avram. Because Yosef can only come after Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So that's all inside, and they're hinted to, and that's these energies, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. And that's the reason why Rabbi Chia says, these days I want to stand upon them. He doesn't just say, I want to know them, I want to stand upon them. Because the entire base of Rabbi Chia is to stand on these energies. He needs these energies to be explained to him. That's why Rabbi Chia is the one who's inquiring about these. He felt that there's a secret here relating to his soul. He can smell that there's something here personal to him. Okay. We are holding now on the second page of the copies I made. And we are holding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines on the bottom. This is in Lekutei Levi Yitzchak on Zohar, Parshas Pinchas, page Taf Chavav is where we're holding now, 5 lines from the bottom. Now today we're going to need already a calculator, so just be aware. But we still have like a half an hour to that. Now he's going to explain why he asked this question from Rebbe Lazar. Rebbe Lazar hu chachma. Rebbe Lazar is the dynamic, the spiritual dynamic of Rebbe Lazar is the energy of chachma, of wisdom, which is the first of the 10 sefirot. Rebbe Chia is Yesod. Yesod is the 9th of the 10 sefirot, and Rebbe Lazar is the energy of chachma, which is wisdom, which is the first. Now, first of all, why is Rebbe Lazar chachma? He doesn't explain here. Over here, he doesn't give any explanation why Elazar is chachma. Looks like he's relying that it's something that he's discussed in the past. I'm just going to say quickly, Elazar is made up of the word Kel Ozer, the God who helps. Now we know Kel is on the right side. Generally, Kel, the name Kel, is associated with Chesed, but many times the name Kel is associated also with Chachma. We know that in Chachma, for example, there is something called Lamed Beis Nesivos Chachma. There's 32 pathways of wisdom, which the 32 pathways of wisdom are really 31 plus 1. The 31 is the name Kel. Again, he doesn't give much explanation over here why Elazar is Chachma, but we'll take him for that. Okay? So Yesod wants to get this information. Yesod, who's Rebbe Chia, foundation, which is the 9th attribute, which is foundation, wants to receive this information from Chachma. I'm going to say, for those that are listening, there are much easier, lighter, comprehensible classes on this channel. Please look for those. This is for, this is not for beginners. Okay, so this class is a seasoned Kabbalist. So, like you have. You have a beginner. I used to go when I was younger, sometimes whitewater rafting. So you have these different runs. You have 1 and 2, it's got a little rapids. 3 and 4 is already fun. But a person who wants to be a little brave can do 3 and 4. I've done those. 5 and 6, you got to be crazy to go into that kind of rapids, unless you are a seasoned kayaker and someone who's willing to risk your life and go into some crazy madness. So I'm saying over here that this run of these classes that we're doing right now is 5 and 6. So only seasoned riders come join me, because I'm not going to explain this to beginners. So please don't get upset that you don't understand. I'm not meant to try. I'm not trying to do that. So we're continuing. I'm going to try to explain whatever I can, but this is dense Kabbalah. Because he explains, because Yesod, foundation, which is the foundation of the Ze'er Anpin, is the male Yesod. That's what Chia is. Rabbi Chia wants to know about this holiday because it's about which is related to his energy, which the energy is the Yesod of who? The male Yesod. That's the place of bonding between male and female. And over here it refers to God's infinite light being the channel that infuses that into the world. That's the Yesod element, the bonding of God. Okay. Because Yesod Za, B'chenes Rebbe Chia, which is the element of Rebbe Chia, Nimshachu Makabel Machachma. It has a particular connection to Chachma. Yesod and Chachma have a particular connection. Now, let me now give a little something over here. Generally, we know that the Ze'er Anpin, the male, the Ze'er Anpin, is more related to Bina than it is to Chachma. Why? Because we discussed this many times, that there's two couples in Atzilus. In the world of in the Sfirot, in the attributes, there's 2 couples, male and female. There's father and mother, those are in the intellectual attributes. Abba and Ima, Chachma, wisdom, and Bina and understanding. And there's the son and daughter, the male Ze'er Anpin, the 6 emotions of God, and Malchut. So we know it's interesting that there's a crossing over. That Malchut, which is kingship, is rooted in Chachma, Abba Yased Brata, that Chachma, the male, the father, has a particular connection to his daughter, and the son is deeper connected to the mother. Mom's boy, dad's girl. That's the way it works. So generally, the Ze'er Anpin is more related to Bina than it is to Chachma. However, the Ze'er Anpin is made up of 6 spheros. Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. So there's 6 sphirot making up the parts of the configuration of the Ze'er Anpin. So even though most of the Ze'er Anpin is built from Bina, Bina is really what develops the boy, the son. However, the Yesod element of the male element of the male, the Yesod element, that comes from Chachma, not from Bina. And why? Because Bina doesn't have the ability to extend herself so far. That means like this. Bina is understanding. Understanding creates emotions. In the human experience, when you learn something and you know something, to really create a lasting emotion, you have to know something thoroughly. We know that's one of the reasons why it says that you should learn a lot of Chassidus, a lot of deeper Torah. Because only when you have a thorough understanding, if you're just learning something and you're getting just a point, a short little point, you're not going to create an emotion from it. Because it hasn't really baked inside of you. Just like physically, a man cannot create a child. A man needs a woman to create the child. What does the woman do? She takes the seed of the man and develops it. So in order to create an emotion is called the children. In order to create the emotions, it's primarily through the Bina, which is the understanding. However, the Bina, although it creates the Ze'er Anpin, which is the emotions, it says Bina extends to Chesed. Bina inserts her energy to create Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod. 5 sphirot receive from Bina. But Yesod, Bina doesn't have the ability to reach all the way down to Yesod. Who's primarily responsible for Yesod? Chachma. That's why we find that Joseph, who represents Yesod, was an orphan from his mother. In other words, he had a father till long in his life. His father was around till Joseph was about 50 years old. Something like that, 55 or something like that, when Jacob passed away. But when he was a young child, maybe 7, 8, he lost his mom. 6 or 7. So there's nothing in the physical world, especially in biblical figures, that is random. So it happened that Rachel died. If she died, then she left him, and he grew up without a mother, is because spiritually his level from where he comes from is without the mother energy. Because Bina does not reach Yesod. Only Chachma has the ability to reach Yesod. That's the relationship of Chia to Rebbe Lazar. Because Rabbi Chia is like Yoseph, and Rebbe Lazar is Chachma. Okay, so now let's see inside of here. Rebbe Lazar is Chachma. Shehu Rebbe Ki Yesod Za, because the Yesod element of Ze'er Anpin, P'chines Reb Chia, that is the level of Rabbi Chia, Nimshachu Mekabel Mechachma, is drawn and receives its vitality and its energy from Chachma, from wisdom. Al derech, this is similar to the idea, sheyesoid abba aruch, and which element of yesod, which element of chachma empowers the yesod of Ze'er Anpin? Which? The yesod of chachma. The yesod of chachma gives power to the yesod of Ze'er Anpin. That means in each sphera there are all 10 spheres. So in chachma there is all 10. It's the yesod element of chachma, of wisdom, the foundation element, the bonding element of chachma that empowers the bounding element of the Ze'er Anpin. Shemispashet ad yesod za. It extends until yesod za. This idea is hinted to in a mitzvah on Purim. Ikamo bePurim, like in Purim, there is a mitzvah called Mishloach Manois, to send gifts, Ish lire'eyu, a man to his friend. Simply, it's the exchanging of gifts. We all send gifts to each other. Mystically, it's explained in Arizal that what the energy we're trying to stimulate through that mitzvah is that Chachma should send a gift to Yesod. Ish is Chachma. Re'eyu, his friend, is Yesod. The sending of the gift is this hashpah from Chachma to Yesod. That says in Arizal. So you see from here, there is a certain bond, a certain channel directly from Chachma to Yesod. Kemoi bePurim, Yesod Abba Shaleach Manois sends gifts l're'eyu to his friend Yesod Zah. Now, why on Purim and why Mishlayach Manois? He's not explaining over here, but he's just bringing you the idea that the Yesod of Ze'er Anpin must receive from Chachma. That's what builds the Yesod of Ze'er Anpin, the Yesod element. That's why Reb Chia, when he needs to know the secret of his own name, of Shmini Atzeres, is when he's active. The one time a year that you need Yoseph to be active and be and is on the day of the intimacy. Which day of the intimacy? Which is the day when Zah and Malchus are being intimate. When is the Zah and Malchus being intimate? When are the male element and experiencing the ultimate intimacy? On Shmini Atzeres. So when Rabbi Chia, who's that very vitality, his soul embodies that energy, wants to know the secret, who is he going to turn to? He's going to turn to from where he receives that vitality from. That very power to be able to give energy to Malchut is coming from the one who constructs the Yesod in Ze'er Anpin, is Chachma, is Rebbe Lazar. Okay. Now. And even though in the story of the Zohar, what happens? He asks Rebbe Lazar, and Rebbe Lazar says, well, it's known already, the secret. He says, no, I heard a very, very deep secret. I heard something really cool from Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, from the great lamp. So he says, okay, so you heard it. He says, yeah, but it went over my head. So basically, he's asking him to explain to him something that he heard from Shimon Bar Yochai, but he needs Rebbe Lazar to explain it. So he's going to explain that idea. The im Reb Chia Yesod kvar shama mila b'hayoyim and alo. Reb Chia already heard something about these days. Mibaitzina kadisha ilah, from the supernal holy lamp. Baitzina means a lamp. Kadisha means holy. Ilah means elevated. And who is that? Who Reb Shimon Bar Yochai? That's Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. But yet he says it was too lofty. So he's going to explain now who's Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. What's his energy? So we know that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was a Gilgul of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what it says in Arizal. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was an incarnation of Moses. That's why he was the one who taught the secrets of the Torah like no one before him. We know that Moshe's which sphera, every tzaddik, every saintly, especially a biblical figure, is personifying certain divine energies. One sphera in particular. What's Moshe's sphera? We know Moshe is Das. And he feeds the Jewish people Das. Das means knowledge. Now, generally, so Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, who is on that same, he's Moshe. So Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was also the Das element. But Das, the way when we usually understand Das is lower than Chachma. Because if you look at the spheros, there is Chachma, wisdom, Bina, understanding, and then Das, knowledge. And Das serves as the connector between the intellect and the emotions. As it explains in Tanya, that if you don't have Das, the intellect is too flies away. It's too lofty. It doesn't create emotions. In order to connect what you know to your heart, to what you feel, you need to have the Das. Das means to fully focus and really concentrate on that which you understand and identify with what you understand. That's the point of Das. Das means to connect, a mental connection. So Das is usually lower than Chachma. So it wouldn't make any sense over here if Reb Chia heard already something from. First of all, we have to understand what's the connection with Reb Chia and Das. We just explained his connection is to Chachma. Why is he hearing this teaching first from Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, which is Das? That's number one. Number two, if he already heard the teaching from Das, and he didn't get it, it was too lofty for him, why is he going loftier? He's going to Chachma, which is much higher. If Das was too much for him, if the energy from Das blew his mind, was above his head, why would you go to a class, to a level much loftier, which is Chachma, to get an explanation of what Reb Shimon Bar Yochai said, which is of a lower level? So therefore, he's going to explain that there's two Das. There's a lower Das and a higher Das. When we say that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is the Das, he's not the lower Das, he's the higher Das. He's the Das that's really still in Keter. The higher Das is above Chachma and Bina. Chachma is Chachma and Bina. It says the lower Das is receiving the intelligence and connecting the emotions to the intelligence. The higher Das is what is the ability to bond the Chachma to the Bina. When you have a flash, which is Chachma, how do you take that point and connect it to the structure? How do you take a point? Sometimes you have people that have a point and they don't have the ability of taking a point and fleshing it out. They just can't connect the point to the Bina. Their Chachma and their Bina don't bond together. You need a specific power called Das to be able to hold on to that point and bring the point bring the right side of the mind, which is the vision, and connect it to the analytical side of the mind, which is the Bina. So there's a certain power, that's a higher Das. That level of Das is where Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's soul was plugged in. That was his energy. That Das is higher than Chacham. It's like as if we would say that Das is Keser, which is higher than Chacham. Since it's Keser, we can now understand why the teaching was too lofty when it was coming from Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. So he needed it to be taught to him by Rebbe Elazar. Elazar is Chachma already. Chachma is already much closer to Yesod than Keter is, than the higher Das. Now, but first he wants to connect. But even if, let's understand something, even if the higher Das is above Chachma, and therefore further away from Rabbi Chia, and therefore Rabbi Chia cannot grasp it. He hears it, but he can't grasp it. But you need to first understand why is he hearing it. The very fact that he heard it is a sign that he's connected to it. He wouldn't have heard a teaching about this from Reb Shimon Bar Yochai had he not have a relationship to this idea. His soul had a connection to it. Albeit it was a very far connection, because it's very, very lofty. That's why you had to hear it again and explain through Rebbe Lazar. But the mere fact that he even heard it from him means that he was connected. And that's because Yesod and Das also have a strong bond. And when I spoke about this in the first class, we say there is no, Yesod does not have any energy without Das. Remember we discussed it in last class, that for a man cannot claim that they were coerced in a sexual sin, because there is no physical excitement for a man unless there is das. The sages use the term ein kushi elo das. There is no excitement for a man only if he has das. So you see from there that Yesod, which is the as he discussed earlier, is the bonding element, the connection, the male element, the masculine element. It needs das to fire it up. Without focus, there is no intimacy. Without connectivity, without mental connection. So that's why Rabbi Chia is connected to Das. However, this Das, being such a lofty Das, it was still too distant. And this is what, let's read it inside. He heard from the supernal lamp. Who is that? Who Rashbi? That's Rashbi. Shubchinas Das, which is the level of Das. As stated in the Sefer Kol Barama, Bereish Bira Idra Rab, in the beginning of the Idra Rabba, where he explains all the sages that gathered, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai gathered together a bunch of sages for a crash course on the deepest mystical things. It was called the Idra. 2 of the sages died in that experience. It was too much for them. 2 or 3 of them they lost. They went in with 10 and they lost 3, I think. So in the Sefer Kol Barama, he explains that these 10 people that gathered for that teaching, they personified each one another sphera. It's in that statement of Kol Barama that he says Reb Abba is Bina. Remember we learned that in the previous teaching that we learned a few weeks ago. The Reb Abba was Bina, and that's why when he was going to Kaputkia, remember we learned that whole thing. So in that over there, he explained that Reb Abba is Bina. And Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, he explains over there, is Das. Rebbe Lazar is Chachma. And Rebbe Chia is Yesod. And Rebbe Yossi is Malchus. So everybody personifies a different sphere. And Rebbe Yehuda is Chesed. And Rebbe Yitzchak is Gevura. Who is Teferes over there? I don't know which one of the other sages were there, but I'm just telling you that each one is, their names weren't just their names. These were the reason they gathered together then for the biggest download in all of history until Moshiach was during that Idra, where they were literally downloading the deepest secrets, was because this was a cluster of the 10 Sefirot embodied in these rabbis and these 10 rabbis. So in that Sefer Kol Barama, he identifies each one who's who. So he's quoting him. Where over there also is explaining this. But which Das is he? He says he's Das Elyon. He's not the lower Das, he's the higher Das. This Das is not the Das that connects the intellect to the emotions. It doesn't connect Chachma and Bina to Chesed and Gevura, but rather it's above Chachma and Bina, and it connects Chachma and Bina together. Kidas Elyon hu lamayla ma Chachma Bina is above Chachma and Bina. Look in Arizal where he talks about the higher Das being above Chachma and Bina. V'zehu shekaray, and that's why when Rebbe Chia said, I heard something, he doesn't say I heard from Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. He says, I heard something from the supernal holy lamp. That's how he's referring to Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. The supernal holy lamp. Why? Because in those 3 words, he's depicting the level of of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Why? Baitzina is das. Das is called a lamp. Now he doesn't get any reference why das is called a lamp, and I don't know what to say. But das is a lamp. Okay, we can guess from today till tomorrow, but there's no explanation. However, the other ones are something that we know. Kadisha, holy. What does it say? Kadisha ilah, the holy supernal one. Ilah means elevated one, the holy. So we know this in many places, that kedusha, holiness, is chachma. Chachma is called holy. Bina is called ilah, the elevated one. Why? Because we know that in Yud Kei Vav Kei, in God's name, of the 4 letters of God's name, Yud is chachma, Hey is bina, Vav is the 6 emotions, and the latter Hey is Malchut. So we know the 2 Heys of God's name. The second Hey is called the lower A, Hey Tata, the lower Hey. The first Hey is called Hey Ila'a, the higher Hey. We also know there is tshuva. There's the lower tshuva, which is in Malchut, and there is the higher tshuva, which is in Bina, tshuva Ila'a. So we see from many places that Bina is called Ila'a, the elevated one. So when he says over here, the lamp, the holy, the supernal one, the lofty one, so the lamp is referring to Das, the Kadisha is referring to Chachma, and Ilah is referring to Bina. Why? Because we're talking about over here not the lower Das that comes after Chachma and Bina, but the higher Das that includes Chachma and Bina. That's why it's called the lamp, the holy, the elevated one. And that's Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Kadisha Chachma, Ilah Bina. And Ilah is Bina. Woo. Now why is Reb Chia even merit to receive a teaching from Reb Shimon Bar Yochai on this? Because Reb Chia, who's Yesod, Sharshai, his root, who bedas. The root, it's very interesting. The root, didn't we just say that the root of Yesod is in Chachma? Chachma is not its root. Chachma is influential on Yesod. Chachma influences Yesod and channels energy to Yesod, but is not the root of Yesod. The root, because Chachma is on the right side, Yesod is in the middle. So the source of Yesod has to be in the middle column. Yesod is rooted in Das. Das Yesod. It works like this: Das, Tiferet, Yesod. So so Yesod is directly rooted in Das. Kemaimer, as the sages say, Ein Kushi Elul Das. You can't have a physical excitement in the Yesod element only if you have mental focus. So that means spiritually that the energy of Yesod is coming from Das, which is the focus, the connection. Look in all these places the connection of Yesod to Das. Perigimel ubedrush harari maravi zal. Some drush in Eitz Chaim where he brings from some Kabbalist, the Rima Ravi. Okay. Zau, and that's the reason why Rabbi Chia was able to plug into Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, because that's his source. Zau sheshama Reb Chia, the Yesod. That's why Rabbi Chia, who personifies Yesod, heard this teaching from who? From Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, who Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is Das, because Das is the source of Yesod. Mila Bahu, he heard a mila, a word. He heard a certain vart. You say, tell me a vart. A vart means tell me a teaching. He heard one teaching on this subject, which is the subject of Yesod, because it's coming to explain Shmini Atzeres, which is all about the Yesod, the role that Yesod will play in the bonding with Malchus. Where does he hear the secret from? He hears it from Rashbi, Because Rashbi, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, is das, from where Yesod takes its energy from. Mila Behuma Rashbi, das, which is das. Avo. But he says, even though I heard something from him, ad loy ka'imna bei, I can't stand on it. Meaning, it's like trying to stand on a round ball. I'm going to fall on it. It's too slippery for me. It's too, the concept that I heard is too abstract, too far from me. Ki, why? Izau medas elyon. Because it comes from the higher das. And the higher das is pretty much the world of Keser. And Keser is not graspable. Grasping starts from Chachma. Chachma is the first light that begins to reveal itself in vessels. Chachma is the first grasp on something. Even though Chachma itself is still only a flash, but it's a flash at least of understanding. Beyond Chachma is still pre-intelligence. You can't really grasp it. And over here he says, it's this idea that the higher das is still unknowable, which means Rashbi is a mystery. Rashbi is unknowable. You can't process it. It's like you don't really understand the Baal Shem Tov until the Alter Rebbe comes. Because the Baal Shem Tov is what? Is Keser. That's why he made a sefer Keser. He didn't make it, but his book is called Keser Shem Tov, the crown of Shem Tov, the Baal Shem Tov. The Alter Rebbe is Chachma. He's already anchoring. He's bringing it down. But the Alter Rebbe is just points. You need the Mittler Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab and all these Rebbe to open up the Alter Rebbe because it's only a flash. It's Chachma. The Mittler Rebbe is the Bina, is all the understanding of it. But the Baal Shem Tov is miracle. He's a miracle. He's a miracle stories. He's like it's Ein Sof. It's infinite. It's beyond the grasp of the understanding. So Rashbi is also that way. He's taking a kesser. He says, where do you know it from? Kizau medas elyon shehu v'loy ba'alef. K'moshe kasev b'Lekutei Torah la'arizal parsha shemois. It says on Lekutei Torah la'arizal parsha shemois b'pasuk kisar lirois. On the pasuk that he turned to see, when it talks about Moshe Rabbeinu taking a step towards the sneh, the burning bush, Hashem saw that he turned. The verse says, Hashem saw that Moshe turned to see. In Lekutei Torah of the Arizal, on that verse, he explains, I didn't look it up. I looked it up another time. I remember this particular Arizal. In the last piece over here that we were learning, he also mentions that Arizal. On that pasuk. I don't know if it's the same piece. Because I remember in Lekutei Torah of the Arizal, there's a few Toros of the Arizal on that pasuk. Kisar lirais. So I can't tell you exactly, but the general idea, the gist of what I'm getting from here, is that there might even be more than one pasuk in the Torah, but there's definitely one where. No, there's more than one. There's definitely two. There might even be three, but definitely two that I know of. Psukim, where it says the word lo. But the word lo can either be spelled with a aleph, lamed aleph, or it can be spelled with a vav. Lamed Vav. It's really not the same exact word. It's loi. Do you pronounce it the same? No. A chaylam is with a vav. It's a chaylam. With an aleph, it's more of a kamatz. La and loi, or la and lo, if you want to use modern. It's la and lo. No. La is with a hey. Okay, I'm not exactly sure. I'm trying to think how it is. But in any case, This is one of the places where there is a Kri and a Ksiv. It's written, I think, with an Aleph. Certain words. I'm going to share with you. There are certain verses in the Torah where the word Lamed is written with an Aleph, Lamed Aleph, but we don't read it with the pronunciation of Lamed Aleph. We read it with the pronunciation of Lamed Vav. I'll give you the example. Hu asanu in Mizmar Letoda, chapter Psalm 100 in Psalms. It says, Hu asanu, he made us, velo anachnu. So we read it as if it was written with a vav. Velo anachnu, and we are to him. Velo anachnu, and to him. Velo means to him. With a vav, it means to him. Velo anachnu, and we are to him. He created us, and we are to him. But it's not written that way. In the writing, it's Hu asanu, he made us. Velo anachnu, and we did not. We did not make ourselves. He made us. There's another place, I know one more place in the Torah for sure. There's a pasuk that says, V'loi niskanu alilois. I don't know where that verse is from. V'loi niskanu alilois. And over there as well, it's written with a aleph, and it's read with a vav. What's the difference between the two? Both the word lo and the word with an aleph or with a vav, they both represent das. With a vav, it's the lower das. For example, the word lulav. Lulav starts with a lamed vav. We know that the entire lulav is to draw down the dot. Because a sukkah is a encompassing energy, is a makif energy. It's a very hovering energy. And the reason we take the daled minim and primarily the lulav, we make the blessing on the lulav, not on the other ones. You don't say on the tilas esro, you say on the tilas lulav. The lulav is the main one. It's the tallest one, and everything is tied to the lulav besides the esrog. But even the esrog, you have to hold it connection to the lulav. And what is it? It's all about bringing down the das. Dasing it. It's all internalizing it. That's why the lulav is like the spine. The spine is in the back. Where does the spine go up to? It goes up to the back of the head. The back of the head is where the das is. The chachma is on the right side. The bina is in the left side, towards the frontal side of the skull. The das is in the back of the head, from where the spine comes from. The nerve system, which is das, because das means to feel something. The entire nerve system runs through the spine, going down. The lulav is like the spine. Amshacha of das, okay, goes through the back, goes through the... So here's this. What did we learn now? There's two levels of das. There is a das which is informing the emotions, the intellect informing the emotions, connecting the intellect. That's a das that we can really know, have a grasp in. Then you spell it lo with a vav. But the higher das is called lamed aleph, lo, not. Because it's a very lofty das. And therefore the word for it is not. It means you can't grasp it. Lo anachnu, to him we are, to him, the him that we are to, you can grasp, to him. But if you say velo anachnu, it's also God. But velo, to a level that we don't know. Anachnu, we are. So a loftier level in God is called lo with an aleph, which means not. A lower level, when it's lowering itself down, is called with a vav, which is more connectable. Two levels. And where do you have these two two levels coming together in the word Elul. Elul is Aleph Lamed, Vav Lamed. The two lows is in the word Elul. The month of Elul coming up next month is a combination of these two levels of Das, the lower Das and the higher Das. We once gave a class on that. They're the two times the word low, but in the reverse order. If it would have been in the order that we're talking about, the month should be called Lolu. Lolu. But it's called El-Ul. It's the same two letters. It's these two Aleph Lamed and Lamed Vav, but you find it in the Torah many times, the two. But what's important over here? He's saying Rav Shimon Bar Yochai is the higher Das. So he's the Das that is low with an Aleph, not low with a Vav. Which low means not graspable, not knowable. So even when you hear a teaching from that place, it remains above. Even Rabbi Chia, who personifies the Yesod element of the Sfirot of Atzilut, could not grasp that lofty level of that teaching. As he says, Kizeu Madas Elyon Shuhu Veloy Ba'alef, it's the low with an Aleph. And he's, like it says in Lekutei Torah of the Arizal, She'i Efshar Lamed Olav. That's not a level that you can stand upon. It's too lofty, it's too infinite, it's too beyond. However, Rebbe Lazar is lower than the supernal Das, than the higher level of Das. Because Rebbe Lazar is already Chachma. The higher Das is pretty much the level of Keser, which is, Keser is above the head. Rebbe Lazar is Chachma. Chachma is the beginning light that starts revealing something. So Rebbe Lazar can reveal it. Rebbe Lazar, B'chenes Chachma, hu yavar eloi. Rebbe Lazar, who is the level of Chachma, he will explain it to him. Ki b'chenes Yesod Zah, because the element of Yesod of Zah, Shanase Eiver Boilet, that becomes a protruding limb, Nimshach Machachma is drawn from Chachma. K'mo shekasa be'etz Chaim, Shara Nasira, Peiches, Ayin Sham. In Eitz Chaim, he's explaining the difference of why the Yesod of the Ze'er Anpin, the male Yesod, is different than the female Yesod. That the male Yesod is protruding. So over there he goes and he explains it's because the energies of Yesod come from Chachma, and Chachma, because it's such an intense light, it can't stay in the inside. It flows outward. And that's the idea of it being boldened and outward, as opposed to the Yesod of the woman, which is coming from a place where there is more concentrated. It's more gevura there. There's much more limitation on that light. So therefore, it's not boled. That's the idea that he explains over there. But what he's just saying from it is that the Yesod of Ze'er Anpin is able to tolerate the lights of Chachma. So Reb Chia was able to hear a teaching from Rebbe Lazar, who's basically explaining Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's teaching that was too lofty for him when he heard it from Rashbi. Okay. That's why Rebbe Lazar can explain it to him. Then Reb Chia will stand up, Yesod will stand up, aleihem, on these teaching. Oh, but here is where it really it turns into a lot of fun. When and at what time did Reb Chia ask this question to Rebbe Lazar? Rebbe Lazar heishav loi, and Rebbe Lazar answered to him. When they were sitting under the shade of one rock in the desert. Right? The class is called Under the Shade of the Rock. So while they sat down under the shade of the rock in the desert, that's when Rebbe Chia asked Rebbe Lazar, And Rabbi Lazar explained it to him. So he's going to explain how nothing is random over here. And this discussion had to happen under the shade of the rock. Because whatever he was going to explain to him over here is the idea of the shade, the rock and the shade coming from the rock in the desert. So he's going to explain later. The last thing he's going to explain why all of this had to happen in the desert. I'm sure you can find the shade of a rock somewhere that's not in the desert. You can go beneath the shade of a building. No, it had to be in the desert. And it had to be, they couldn't talk in the sun, even though until now they were in the sun, they were walking in the sun. But this particular conversation they could not have only under the shade, but the shade has to come from the shade of a rock in the desert. Basically, if you're able to read the divine code, then the rock and the shade and the desert is really the internal element of this conversation. These humans over here, these rabbis, were only speaking out the secrets that they picked up from the rock and the shade and all that. The secret was there already in the rock and in the shade. What secret? The secret of the very teaching that they were going to teach. What was he going to teach him? What is the secret of the 21 days and Shmini Atzeres, which is the 22nd day? That it comes from first 10 days of intense harshness, of God's judgment, which is Gevura. Then 11 days, and primarily the Sukkot, 7 days primarily of kindness. 7 or 11, depending if you count the 4 days between Yom Kippur and only then can you have Shmini Atzeres. So he's going to explain that the rock is hard. That's the Gevura. The shade is the Chesed of Sukkot. Sukkot is all about shade. The rock is the firmness, the harshness of Rosh Hashanah. The shade coming from the rock is because Sukkot comes from Rosh Hashanah. You cannot, some people don't like the high holidays. It's too threatening, it's too intense. Especially those people who love lovey-doveyness with God. They don't like the idea of having God judge them. They just don't like judging. You have a lot of spiritual people that way. I know people like that. They want to have Judaism just based on love. So anything that God is judging the world and so on, it gets them very nervous. So there are some people who want to check out. Imagine that. Why not? Check out before Rosh Hashanah. As soon as you get the slichus, go to sleep. Go into hibernation. Go into a cave. Go to sleep. Wake me up in the sukkah. I sometimes feel that way. I don't blame it. I don't either like so much Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Why? It's very intense. You really got to bare your soul. You got to really, you're standing in front of God. It's fearful. It's intense. Sukkah's it's great. You cannot have sukkahs if you don't go first through because the sukkah is created from the remorse, from the tshuva, from the trepidation, from that whole intensity of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That itself creates the sukkah. Like the shade was from the rock. So they needed to be, and so we'll see why they needed to be in the desert. So he's going to go into a whole long mystical explanation why the rock is Rosh Hashanah and is the time of Gevura. And that's the rock. The shade is Sukkot. It's almost like when Rabbi Lazar answered, what's so amazing is that when you have an insight in this world, a true insight, the insight is probably sitting in the coffee that's in front of you in the coffee shop, or it's in the flower that's out in the garden that you're passing by. The insight is there. It's in the leaves, it's in the trees, it's in the setting around you. It's just you don't realize that the stuff around you is a bunch of information. But even if you don't realize it because you're not a Kabbalist, so you can't read the information that's around you in the rocks, in the flowers, in the trees, and the birds, in the whole setting that you're around, but you can still pick up subconsciously the vibrations. And then because of these vibrations, it throws an idea in your head. And suddenly you have this like epiphany. You don't realize that epiphany is actually everything around you. That's what I get in this story. They could have walked right by and sat there, and had Reb Chia not asked Rebbe Lazar would never have told him the secret of the shade of the rock that's happening. But the reason he was able to give him that whole teaching was because they were sitting under the shade of the rock in the desert. And it was Rabbi Chia, it's his soul source that needs to know the secret here. Rebbe Lazar, who's the one who has the answer, because he has to feed it to him. But it could not have happened in a different setting. It had to be over there. So it's cool. So when did he ask him the question? When they were sitting under the shade of one big rock in the desert. So first he's going to talk about the stone, then he's going to talk about the shade, and then he's going to talk about the desert. There are two things over here. Tanra. The word of the Zohar is Tanra. Tanra over here means an Aramaic word for rock. That's so amazing. Even though this is not the holy tongue, it's not Hebrew, it's Aramaic. But yet, even the words of the Zohar that are Aramaic contain deep Gematria of the deepest secrets of existence. Imagine if you would do Gematria on English words. On words in the English language, in the English alphabet. Here he's doing that with words of the Zohar, which is Aramaic. It's not even Hebrew. Maybe if you say biblical words, has meaning in the Gematria, the numbers. But you see, no. He says, what are they? There's Tanra, which is the rock, Vitzel, and there is shade. Rabbi Lazar Amar, and Rabbi Lazar says, and what? And Rabbi Lazar was delighted when he saw that shade. He said, shetzila chedvesa denafshahu, that the shade is the joy of the soul, the delight of the soul. That's what he said first. After he sat down and he said, this shade is so delicious, is delightful to the soul. That's when Rabbi Chia asked him the whole question about these. Tell me the secret of these 22 days. And he goes and he gives him the answer. Why? So he says like this. Ki atanra shuhu sela, the tanra, which is really in Hebrew, it's called a sela, a rock. The even chazak, and a firm stone. Roimez al gevurais. That is symbolic of gevura. It's not just symbolic. What makes a rock hard is because it has within it, a rock has gevura inside of it. That's why it's hard. Because gevura is hard. Might, strong, hard. Well, that's important over here. Because remember, God initiates the entire bond that God draws us into the deep intimacy. Starts with God acting to us in a firm way. He's coming as a tough judge. He's coming to judge the world. That's God's left hand that's beneath our head when? On Rosh Hashanah. Shema Rosh Hashanah ad Yom Kippur. That's from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. Remember, that itself is the teaching that he taught him. He told him from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, God is acting to us in a very tough manner. He's pretending to be a judging king. Not so much our lovey-dovey father, but God is being a king. He's bringing us to trial. Rosh Hashanah is a day of trial. So that's God being hard like a rock. Now he says, okay, it's not just, anybody else could have said that. The next part, you need the Rebbe's father to say. Now he's going to show you a billion secrets, not a billion, but a whole bunch of secrets, how the rock really is the shofar, which is the gevura, the main power of the gevura of Rosh Hashanah, the judgment, the whole. He says, let's take the word tanra. So the word tenar, which is the main word, which means a rock in Aramaic. The numeric value of the word tenar, tes nun reish, is 259. Tes nun reish is 259. Now 259 misparai is the number Gimel pa'amim Elokim. It's 3 times, it's equivalent to 3 times Elokim. Elokim is 86. So let's take out the calculator over here. 86, what do I mean is Elokim is 86? The numeric value of God's name Elokim is 86. 86 times 3 is 258. What did we say is the word tener? 259. Remember the golden rule in Gematria? Gematrias can always be off by 1. Because you also count the word itself. 3 times Elokim is 258. It's the same numeric value as the word rock in Aramaic, tinar. Now, why 3 times? Now, we know Elokim is Gevura. The name, the tetragrammaton Yud Kei Vav Kei is compassion. And Elokim is Gevura. And when the Torah says Bereshis bara Elokim, in the beginning when God created, it says Elokim, the Lord created. The sages say that because it uses the word Elokim, we see from there that God wanted to create the world initially just with judgment. And then God mellowed out later. He said, let's the world won't withstand the judgment. Let's cut them some slack. But initially God wanted to create a world with judgment because it says the name of Elokim. Now, why 3 times Elokim? We're going to see soon there are 3 places where there is Gevura. 3 primary Gevuras. There is Bina has Gevura. Bina is on the left side. Chacham is on the right side. Bina is on the left side. There is the intellectual Gevura, which is Bina. There is the emotional Gevura, which is Gevura. Chesed Gevura. Gevura on the left side. And Malchus, kingship, also is filled with Gevura. So there's 3 places in the divine where there is Gevura. Those are the 3 times the name Elokim. Now, when you have all these 3 Gevuras wrapped together, you got a whole lot of Gevura. And that's really expressed in which part of the body? In the neck and in the throat. In Hebrew, the word garon, the word neck is the word garon. Garon is 259, same like rock. What is when a person feels constriction? Where do you feel it most? When you have constriction in your life, when you have anxiety and stuff like that, usually you feel it in your neck. The place that's always needed mostly to be massaged is the shoulders and the neck, because that's where constriction. It's also the narrowest part of the body, is the neck. The body goes very narrow over there, because that's constriction. That's Gevura. Gevura is constriction. The 3 Elokims are here in the neck. The whole Egyptian exile was that we got stuck in the neck. Mitzrayim is Meitzar Hagaron, the 3 times Elokim, which corresponds, as we learn in Chassidus many times, to the 3 ministers of Pharaoh. Each one was another constricting energy. The butcher, the baker, and the butler. The 3 ministers of Pharaoh. When Joseph goes down to Egypt, 3 times Elokim, Garon. So the word tener, which is the rock, is the same numeric value as the neck. So it's a lot of Gevura there. Okay. Gimel pamim Elokim imakoil kamoy Garon, the same like Garon. Vahu hagimel b'chines Gevurais. These are the 3 Gevurais. Now, Rosh Hashanah is the main day. If you have to find one day in the year that's full of Gevura, which day is called Yom Hadin? Din is judgment. Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the most Gevura-dig day in the year. That's why we immediately dip the apple in honey. Why do we start Rosh Hashanah? Dip the apple in the honey. Why do we do that? Because you need to sweeten judgments. There's a lot of Gevura on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah by night, ferocious Gevura in the world. God is not kidding. He's really judging. There's a lot of Gevura, very intense Gevura. And now, why? Because Rosh Hashanah, God is reconstructing his attribute of kingship. Every year, God's attribute of kingship dissolves before Rosh Hashanah. The way Chassidus explains it, it means that God is not interested anymore in being a king. But then he re-engages with kingship so that the worlds can exist another year. The worlds exist based on God's kingship. So on Rosh Hashanah is the time of Binyan HaMalchut, the building of kingship. Malchut is primarily built on Gevura. Melech b'mishpat, a king, the position of kingship is, the main energy of a king is judgment. Kingship is full, Malchus is full of Gevura. Now this is all hinted to on the events that happened on the first Rosh Hashanah. On the first Rosh Hashanah in history, Adam was created. But the fact that Adam was created on that day, the first human was created. Rosh Hashanah is, we celebrate Rosh Hashanah on the 6th day of creation, Friday, the day that God created Adam. But according to the mystics, the big deal is not the creation of Adam, of Adam. The big deal is the creation of Eve. Rosh Hashanah is all about the making of the woman. Forget about the man. That's not interesting. The whole point over here is the creating of the woman. Because the woman is kingship. The attribute of kingship of God is feminine. And that has to be reconstructed every year. Where is the attribute of kingship before it's constructed? It's a potential in God, but it's not a developed concept. It's a potential. And God has to manifest his kingship, not just have the potential. Where was Eve before she was created? A rib in her husband. That's the idea that Malchut is a potential in God, but not manifest. The whole Rosh Hashanah is to take the rib and create a whole person out of it. Every year, Rosh Hashanah, God builds the rib into a full-fledged person. And that's constructing the woman. So mystically it says, and for that, in order to construct the woman, there is a lot of Gevura flowing. Because the woman is built, Malchus is built on Gevura. So there has to be a lot of Gevura. So first we have to build Malchus with Gevura. But once she's constructed, we need to sweeten her. We can't leave her in the Gevura because then we'll be in a lot of trouble. That was the main. So Rosh Hashanah has two parts to it. First is drawing down the Gevura. And that's through the fear and the trepidation and the acceptance upon ourselves of the kingship of God. Eliciting kingship, that's all Gevura. But we also do things afterwards to sweeten it because we want to mellow it out. To bring in a whole lot of kindness into the equation. So now, to create the woman, the three levels of Gevura were active. The three Elokims. That's the reason why. Here's a real cool one. Okay, you get ready for a real cool one. In the creation of Eve, in the creation of Chava, it happened while Adam was in a deep sleep. This was the first anesthetic, this was the first anesthesia. God acted as an anesthesiologist. He put Adam to sleep, and he removed the rib, And he built Chava from that rib. That sleep, when Adam was put under, the Torah refers it as Tardema. The verse doesn't say that Adam went to sleep. It says, Vayapel Elokim, Hashem cast ala Adam on man, Tardema, a deep sleep. Tardema. Now the word Tardema is the numeric value of 3 times Gevura. Gevura, Gevura, Gevura. 3 times Gevura. Gevura is 216. Not the name Elokim. Elokim is 86. But the word Gevura is 216. Back to our calculator. 216 times 3 is 648. Let's look at the word Tardema. Tardema, Tuf Resh is 600. Plus Dalid Mem Hey. So Mem and Dalid and Hey is 49. 600 plus 49 is 649. And what did we say is 3 times Gevura? 648. When Hashem put Adam to sleep, he gave him a Tardema. The point for that was to construct Chava with the Tardema energy, which are the 3 times Gevura. God was downloading Gevura, very intense Gevura, to create Chava, to create the Shekhinah, to create Malchut. 3 times Elokim. So we see that the essence of Rosh Hashanah, which is all this Tardema, which is all this Gevura, 3 Gevuras, is very much related to that hard rock. Right? Because the rock is 3 times Elokim. Tanra, Taf Nun Resh, Tes Nun Resh, that the Zohar uses is the numeric value of 3 times Elokim. 3 times Elokim is the same like 3 times Gevura. Because Elokim is Gevura. It's just here it's God's name, and here it's the word Gevura, but it's the same theme. So the Tener, which is the rock, is the same idea of Rosh Hashanah and of the hardness of Rosh Hashanah, of the Gevura of Rosh Hashanah. So let's see. This is the 3 Gevurais that are drawn into Malchus be'esar Tardema at the time of the sleep. Gematria Gimel Pamim Gevura. The word Tardema is Gematria 3 times the word Gevura im hakolel. Whenever it says Aleph Hey, it means im hakolel. With the kolel, because 3 times Gevura is 248. In order to get to 249, you have to add the kolel. Fine. Look in the book, the word Tardema in Ma'ora Or, where he explains that the Tardema that God put on. And by the way, every Rosh Hashanah it says there is this deep cosmic sleep as well, in order to develop and bring forth the Malchus. Now it says that we shouldn't sleep on Rosh Hashanah during the daytime. We should stay awake. And that's probably because we want to counter these Gevura. The whole Tardema is to for God to be able to really, really kick in the Gevura. It's like you're doing what do you put someone to sleep? Because you're doing a surgery and you don't want them to feel the pain. So they put them under. So God is putting us, is like, that's why Rosh Hashanah probably we get so tired. Truth is, by me, I'm never as tired as Rosh Hashanah afternoon. After the meal, you're not allowed to sleep, and it's usually only 1 hour to go back to shul for mincha. It's my hardest hour of the year. It's like the entire cosmic energy is trying to put me to sleep. That's what I feel. And my wife says, it's okay, I'll sleep a little. And I'm saying, and then no, the truth is the opposite. She says I shouldn't sleep, and I say, I'm just dozing. try to fight it like crazy, but it's like always that nap. Okay, he's sitting on there. Maybe it's the whole thing. Maybe it's I don't know what it is, but I think it's a spiritual thing. Why? Because the cosmic energy is one of sleeping, so that God can get business done. The judgments can kick in, but we don't want to do that. We want to stay awake, so you can't kick the judgments in. You understand? We want to. If you stay awake, then no judgments can hit you, right? Because there is the judgment that has to do with the sleep. So now there's another inspiration to stay awake. You got to get yourself a triple espresso on Rosh Hashanah to stay awake all day long. Anyways, what are these three gevuras? What did we say earlier? Why are there three gevuras? Because there's three places where there is gevura. In Malchut, in Ze'er Anpin, the Ze'er Anpin has gevura, because the Ze'er Anpin is made up of Chesed, Gevura, Teferes, Netzach. The left hand of the Ze'er Anpin is gevura. And Bina is on the left side, is full of gevura. That's what he says over here. What are the three gevuras? The Chelka, her Chelek. Who's Chelek? Malchus is Chelek. The word over here, again, look inside. The Chelka, her portion. That means the gevurot that belong to Malchut, herself. Diza, the gevura that belongs to the Ze'er Anpin. And the Bina and the gevura that belongs to Bina. These are the three levels of gevura that are being downloaded on Rosh Hashanah, which make up the three names Elokim, which are very active on Rosh Hashanah. V'hu gimel pamim Elokim, and this is the three times Elokim. Shezao masha Elokim hu begimel mekaymos. That's why we know that mystically, when it says the word Elokim, Kabbalistically we say it's in three places. Sometimes Elokim is, when it says Elokim, it's referring to Bina, Bibina. Sometimes when it says Elokim, it's referring to Gevura. When it says Gevura over here, he means Sfiras HaGevura, the attribute of Gevura. And some Gevura Deza, the Gevura of the Ze'er Anpin. V'gam Hoid Bechlal, Hod is also included. Because in Ze'er Anpin there are two Gevuras. There is the left hand and the left leg. Hod is also an extension. But Hod and Gevura are really one. So primarily it's in three places. In Bina, in the Ze'er Anpin on the left side of the Ze'er Anpin, and B'malchus, and in Malchus. V'ayin b'Zayir Chodesh Aleph, Taflam and Aleph, Amid Beis. Look in the Zohar where it talks about these three levels of Gevura. Elokim Ilah, over there in the Zohar, it refers to it as follows. Elokim Ilah, the supernal Elokim. What did we learn earlier? When it says Ilah, it's referring to Bina. Bina is called Ilah. Then there's Elokim, the Pachad Yitzchak. There's the Elokim that relates to Isaac, which Isaac is Pachad Yitzchak, the dread of Yitzchak. That's the Elokim of Yitzchak. And then there's Elokim Basra, the latter Elokim. The Zohar over there explicitly speaks about the three names of Elokim in these three places. When you take these three Elokims together, and all three, it's extremely Gevura. That's Yom Hadin, the day of judgment. That's the neck. And what do we say on Rosh Hashanah? Min ha-meitzar, from the constriction we call out to you. What's the constriction in the neck? The three Elokims create enormous constriction, enormous judgment. We need those judgments to construct things, but at the same time, we don't want those judgments to get too out of hand. Ubezayir Chodesh Gimel Daf Samachei Amid Aleph Gimel Dargin Inin. Over there it says there's three levels. So that's what this rock. So the Rebbe's father finds that all in a rock in the desert. When it says there's a rock in the desert, that rock, which the Zohar calls a Tanra, has all the secret that we just discussed in it, because Tener is three times Elokim. Okay? But we're not done yet. That rock is also indicating Rosh Hashanah. It's also related not just to Rosh Hashanah in general, but it's related to the Shofar of Rosh Hashanah. How is it connected to the Shofar of Rosh Hashanah? Sheshofar hu b'chinas garon. Shofar is the throat. First of all, the shofar is blown very close to the throat. Where do you blow the shofar from? You hold the shofar at your mouth, and you take the breath goes right through the neck, right through the throat, through the garon. But the connection of the shofar to the garon is even stronger. There's a pasuk. There's a pasuk that says, Kara begaron k'shofar harem kolech. It's a pasuk in Isaiah. It says, when Isaiah is saying that there's so much corruption, how do you sit silent when there's such corruption? When you're watching such evil, when you're watching such, I'll give an example. When you're watching the world defending Hamas against the innocent hostages and against the innocent people of Israel that have been attacked, it's supposed to enrage you so much, you can't sit by quietly. The verse is saying, Kara begaron, yell out from your neck, from your throat. K'shofar harem kolech, like a shofar, raise your voice. That's what the prophet is calling for. You see that the shofar and the garon is connected. It says, because the verse says, call out the begaron, and like a shofar, raise your voice. So the shofar and the garon are connected. V'ayim be'etz chaim shar erech anpin perik ches. Look in the 8th chapter in Eitz Chaim, where you'll see that connection. I did not look it up, so I can't tell you what it says there. The shofar, who gamkein. Now, the shofar also has in it 3 times Elokim. What is the shofar made up? If the shofar is connected to the garon, and the garon, the throat, is what? 3 times Elokim. So the shofar must also have 3 times Elokim in the word shofar. So we learned this already, Lag BaOmer by night, when we did a teaching about Lamed Gimel, about 33, about Jerusalem and so on, and shofar. We learned about this teaching already. We said that shofar is 3 times Elokim. Where do we see that shofar is 3 times Elokim? Okay, so we have to get creative over here. Shin is 1 time Elokim. The first letter of the word shofar is a shin, is 1 time Elokim. The middle 2 letters, which is Vav Pei, is the 2nd time Elokim. And the Reish is the 3rd time Elokim. Now, if I had to give you this as a riddle, one of them is pretty simple. The Vav and the Pei is 86. So the middle of the word shofar is 86. 86 is the same numeric Gematria as the word Elokim. But the Shin and the Reish, how are they Elokim? So it works like this. Shin is the Milui of Elokim. That means if you spell the letters of the word Elokim out, and you fill the Hey with a Yud, remember the Hey in the world of Miluyim, the Hey can be filled with Alephs, or it can be filled with a Hey, or it can be filled with a Yud. Elokim b'miluy Yudin. When you fill the Hey of the word Elokim with a Yud, and then you count up all the Gematria, you get 300. Let's do it. Aleph, the first letter of the word Elokim is Aleph. Aleph is spelled Aleph Lamed Pei. So together it's 111. Okay, you're doing the math? Aleph is 111. Lamed, the next letter of the word Elokim is a Lamed. Lamed is Lamed Mem Daled. So Lamed Mem Daled is 74. Lamed and a Mem is 70, and Daled is 4. 74 plus 111 is what? 180. 185. Yeah. Hey, Elo, the next one is Hey. Hey Yud is 15. 185 plus 15 is 200. Yud is 20. Because Yud is 10, but you spell out the Yud as Yud Vav Daled. So it's 10 and 10. So it's 20. 220. Mem is mem. Two mems is 80. 220 plus 80 is 300. So Shin, which is 300, the numeric value of Shin is 300, is Elokim. Every time you see a Shin, you know it's Elokim. So the Shin of the word Shofar is really one Elokim. The Pei and the Vav is the second Elokim. And where's the third one? The Resh. How is Resh Elokim? Resh is 200. How is that equal Elokim? So here we're going to do another trick. Here we are going to do the Gematria of the word Elokim, not the Miloi. We're leaving out the inside letters, but we're going to play a little game with Elokim. This is called Biribua. This is called Ribua. Ribua Gematria works like this. You take a word and you put the letters like this. First an aleph on one line. Then I'm using the word Elokim. You can do this with any word, but obviously. Before we take the word Elokim, let's try another word. Let's take the word Deles, a door. Ribua of the word Deles, which is, Deles is spelled Daled Lamed Taf. The Ribua of the word Deles would be like this. You put a Daled on one line, it's 4. In the next line, you put Daled Lamed, it's 34. And in the next line, you put Daled Lamed Saf, which is 434. And now you add the 3 lines together. 434 plus 34 plus 4. That's called Ribuya. Now, why there is such a secret, God knows why. But there is such a system in Gematria. Kabbalah uses it all the time. In this system, if you take the word Elokim and you put Aleph on the top line, Aleph is 1. Then you do Aleph Lamed is 31. But let's add together 31 plus 1 is 32. Okay, the first 2 lines make you 32. Let's add the third line, Aleph Lamed Hey. Aleph Lamed Hey is 36. So now let's take 36 plus 32. Is what? 68, right? Good. Now, Aleph Lamed Hey Yud. So it's 36 plus 10, 46. 46 plus 68. You give me the math. 46 plus 68. I could do it on the calculator here. It will be faster. 46 plus 68 is 114. And then you take the whole word Elokim, which is 86, right? Plus 86 is 200. So this system of Aleph, Aleph Lamed, Hey, it's called Ribuya, is Elokim, in this system is Reish, is 200. So the word shofar, to a Kabbalist, to a regular person, a shofar is a horn of an animal. To a Kabbalist, the shofar is 3 times Elokim. Which is this, 3 times Elokim is the same numeric value of the rock in the desert. Next time you're sitting on a rock in the desert, remember your Kabbalah that you learned, okay? Don't trample on rocks just like that. Go rock climbing in the desert. Recognize there's something to these rocks over here. The shofar ugam came gimel pamim Elokim. How do you have the 3 times Elokim? B'miloy yudin. When you're doing the miloy is 1 time Elokim. That's the shin. U pashut. Pashut means the word Elokim itself. Simple. 86. And ribua, the ribua is the secret that we discussed earlier. Setting up the tears like that. Kimisparai, like its number. So shofar is 3 times Elokim, like its number. But we're not done yet. Shofar yoitzim zayin hevalim. What do you do with a shofar? You blow breath. So breath in Hebrew is called hevel. Hevel means a breath. Now, King Solomon, in the beginning of his book of Kehelas, mentions that the world is hevel 7 times. Havel havalim omar Kehelas, hakel havel. He mentioned 7 times the word hevel in the beginning of Kehelas. It says that the shofar, the breath that comes out from the shofar, are these 7 hevels that Shlomo HaMelech is talking about. So, you take the word hevel. Hevel is Gematria 37. Hey, Beis, Lamed, 37. Since there are 7 havalim, 7 breaths, we're soon going to see what these 7 breaths are. But there are 7 breaths. So you have to make 7 times hevel, 7 times 37. So 7 times, here we go. 7 times 37, 259. Well, it happens to be that the rock is 259. Pretty cool rock, no? It's pretty much, it was reminding Rebbe Lazar a lot about the shofar, right? When he asked him the question. You realize when Rebbe Lazar sits down, he's processing all of this. In seconds. He doesn't, it's like just happens. Boom. So the rock, and now we're soon going to see what the shade of the rock is. We're going to get to that. But first, the rock. So the rock is the energy of Rosh Hashanah. Gematria tener. The 7 hevolim, the 7 hevels, which is Gematria tener. The yoitzem mahashofar. And it comes out from the shofar. Beis pamim kal. 2 times kal. Now let's understand something. The main thing about the shofar is lishmoa kol shofar, to hear the sound of the shofar. Kol shofar. Where does the sound of the shofar come from? It comes from the breath. The breath produces the kol. So in Kabbalah, in the Arizal, he explains what does that mean. So he's an awesome teaching in Arizal and Pri Etz Chaim, in the kavanot of the shofar, in the mystical intentions of the shofar. Shara Shofar Perek Aleph. The Arizal teaches like this. There are 13 Tikkune Diyukna, 13 tikkunim in the beard of God, of Keser. 13 attributes of mercy related to the 13 tikkunim. The 7th one of those tikkunim is the word emes. The 13 tikkunim. The 7th one is the word emes. Now, if it's the 7th tikkun, which is truth, emes is truth. If it's the 7th tikkun, that means it must have an element of 7 inside of it. So the Arizal says that the emes is made up of 7 times God's name. That's the emes. That's the truth. Where is God's truth revealed? through a combination of the 7 times of God's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Now, Yud Kei Vav Kei is the tetragrammaton, which usually is 26. You following? Usually it's 26. But now we're counting also the hidden letters. So we know that in Shem Havaya, if you count the hidden letters, this we've discussed many times, there's 4 possibilities. 72, 63, 45, and 52. Depending how you fill the letters with which. We're going now with 63. For whatever reason. 63 times 7. Who hasn't have enough Gematria for the night? Here we go. 63 times 7. 441. 441 is the word MS. So think about it. The MS is the 7th tikkun of the 13 tikkunim. It's called MS, 441. It's 7. So it's 7 times God's name of Shem Samach Gimel. Now, listen up. The name Samach Gimel, the name 63 is in Bina. 72 is in Chachma. 63 is in Bina. 45 is in the Ze'er Anpin, in the 6 emotions. And 52 is in Malchut. That's a discussion for another time. But we've discussed this many times. 63 is in Bina. 7 times 63 are the 7 lower emotions that are in Bina. That's what it says in Eitz Chaim. That means Bina is a full parts of. She's a full configuration. She contains within herself 7 emotions in Bina. The 7 emotions of Bina are the 7 names of 63, which is Gematria MS. Okay? Now, but listen to this. The full 63 times 7 is 441, which is MS. However, when you take away the front letters and you leave only the inside letters, only the miloi, so you have to subtract from 63, 26, because you're taking away the Yud, the Hey, and the Vav and the Hey. So you're taking away 26. 63 minus 26. $63 minus 26. 37. That's the word Hevel. So the 7 Havalim, the 7 Hevels, the 7 breaths that the world is created with, 7 breaths, which is what Kehelah speaks about, 7 Hevels. That's the miloi. That's the hidden, that's the miloi of the 7 times Havaya of 63. Now, miloi, in general, the Arizal says, the miloi letters are always gevura. Tzimtzum, contraction. How do you see that? The word miloi, which means hidden, filling letters, is Gematria Elokim, 86. The word miloi itself, Mem Yud Lamed Vav, is 86. Telling you that always, whenever you have miloi is always Elokim. For example, the miloi of Yud Kei Vav Kei of 45 is 19. 19 is Gematria Chava. Chava is Elokim. She's the Shechina. Chava is Elokim. In the Yud Kei Vav Kei, when it's Gematria 45, is Gematria Adam. If you take away 26 from 45, you're left with 19. Gematria Chava. Chava is Elokim. Chava, Eve, she's the woman. She's Elokim. He's Havaya. She's Elokim. Because the Miloi letters are always Gevura. Fine. So the Hevel of Shem Samach Gimel are all the collection of all the Gevuras. Of the 7 63s that make up MS. So those 7 Hevalim. Now 7 times 37. What did we say earlier? 37 times 7, 259. Gevura. That's why it's so much Gevura there. These Hevalim is like enormous Gevura. The rock. The Garon. Fine. $259 plus 1, because you can always add 1, is 260. Samach Reish, 260. So 260 is a very gevuridige number. When that 260 energy goes through the shofar, these gevura, there's an enormous gevura there. There's enormous, intense gevura coming out of the shofar. It's the hevel, the breath, that's coming out. So above, when we blow shofar, God is blowing shofar. So it's an enormous gevura that's coming out through the shofar. The gevura has splits. Half goes, and it's coming from Bina, right? Because Bina is where the 63 is. It's coming from Bina. It splits. Half of it goes to him, and half goes to her. Half goes to the son and half goes to the daughter. Half goes to the male, to the Ze'er Anpin, and half goes to Malchus. Half of 260 is Kuf Lamed, is 130. That's the kol, that's the sound. However, he is a boy. So a boy is always Vav. When you want to say his hand, you say Yado Vav. Or you want to say give it to him, you say Lo, give it to him, Lamed Vav. If you want to say give it to her, you say La with the Hey. The woman is the Hey, the man is the Vav. In God's name, Vav is the boy, the 6 emotions, and Hey is the Shekhinah. So when the Kuf Lamed connects to the Ze'er Anpin, to the Vav, it becomes Kol Shofar. Kuf Lamed, it's half the Hevel. That's what it says in the Arizal. Half of this, again, there are 7 Havalim, there are 7 breaths over here, which are all Gevura. From God's ultimate truth. The 7 Havalim that come out, which is Gematria 260, 7 Miloi of Sag, of Samach Gimel. Now that it splits 130 and 130, half goes to him, half goes to Malchut. The part that goes to him picks up the Vav, and the Kuf Lamed becomes Kol. Kuf Lamed, and the Kol means the sound. That's the Kol Shofar. When it goes to her, it becomes Kala, Kuf Lamed Hey. Kola. But he doesn't explain where do you see in Shofar the idea. When you make the bracha, you say Lishmoa Kol Shofar. You don't say Kola. So I'm not sure what happens with the Kuf Lamed that goes to her, like where that disappears. I don't know. But that's the secret that the Arizal says over here. As he says, fine. Malchut kalav mitzdarif zeh kol shazam vav shaloi v'nasa koil v'hakal denukva mitzdarif em heishala v'nasa kala v'zeh soid koil shofar. And that's the secret of the koil of the shofar. But the Arizal continues that the main power of the shofar, this is really cool, even though this is not part of this part that we just learned is part of the Rabbi Levi's Torah. But if you're looking in Arizal over here, this part is not part. The main part of the shofar is not the sound that's coming out and the splitting of it. The main part of the shofar is the one who's blowing, the Baal Tokea. When he blows, his face gets red. Primarily, his cheeks get red, filled with blood, because you're putting the blood goes over here. That blood is indicating the redness, and it says, if you're able to, it's hard for the women because they're in the women's section, but if you're able to, you should look at the face of the person blowing, and you should look into his redness of his cheeks, because that's where the real sweetening is taking place. Why? He says, I'm quoting Arizal. Kisha Adam Tokea, as a pun of misadmim, his face becomes red. V'zeu roimes, and this is indicating el makar hakolos, the root of these havalim, these hevels. The hevel is the breath, where the sound is coming from. Where is it coming from? The breath is just the gevura, but it's coming from the 7 names. It's coming from the 7 names of Samach Gimel, of 63. And 7 times 63, that means your origins, when all 7 are one, is the Tikkun Emes. Now it says in Kabbalah that in God's face, the 13 Tikkunim, we usually refer to it as the 13 strands of the beard of Keser. It's not really 13 strands. It's the entire bottom of the face. It says that the tikkun ve'emes doesn't have any hair. That's the part in the cheek that is beardless. That's what it says in Kabbalah is it's called shtei tapuchim, the 2 apples of the face, where there's no hair. That's the place that gets red when you're blowing. It's panui misairos. And the fact that there's no hair there represents there's no gevura there. Because here represents gevura, constriction. In the tikkun ve'emes, there's no constriction. You want to trace these havalim back all the way to their source from where they come from, and in the original source from where they come from, there is no gevura there. So this is like changes, as he says, Shem Zayin Avolim, Shem Zayin Shemai Samach Gimel, the betrain Tapuchin the Atika. These are the 2 apples of Atik Yomin, of the Ancient of Days. And this awakens the supernal face, the Atika. Shem Zayin Shemai the Samach Gimel, the 7 names of Samach Gimel, Imeirin, and they're shining. And when that shines, when that MS shines, there's nothing to worry about. That's the secret of the face of the one that's blowing. And that's why the word shofar is from the word shufra. Shufra means the countenance of the face. Like the sages say, shufra de Yaakov, me'ein shufra de Adam. The appearance, the facial appearance of Jacob was similar to the radiant face of Adam. So the word shufra means, from the word shofar, is referring, V'hu yoifi panim da'atika. It's the stunning, beautiful face of Atik Yomin, of the Ancient of Days. Hamizgalim, that is revealed through the shofar. Kim Sha'anim. So you just get it from here. The reason why we have to learn this, you're wondering, why are we learning this? We're learning this because when you start reading this, you realize how every tiny little thing of Judaism is so laden with secrets upon layers upon layers. And we're given a gift that we're given the final product. We just have to do what we're told to do, and everything is taken care of. On all these levels of like, that's why it says, Ashrei ha'am, how fortunate is the people, Yodei Teruah, that know how to blow. So we know how to blow. We blow. But we're given already the final product that contains within it the deepest, deepest secrets of renewing the energies of the world in a way that there is no judgment and so on and so forth, and the flow flows. All of this. Anyways, back to what we're learning over here. He says that the Yotzema Shofar base pum, and now we're going to go back inside the letter of it, inside the writing in his explanation of the Zohar. He says the Yotzema Shofar, and from the shofar comes out base pumim kal, 2 times the word kal. Remember, because what comes out of the shofar? 7 hevels, which are Gematria 260. When you divide them in half, it becomes kal. And he says the word tanra is Gematria base pamim kal. Haresha tanra. Tanra is that. What's the tanra? Tanra is the rock. Is literally the left hand that's beneath my head. And this is the idea of Chasaf Hashem Ezroya Kachay. That Hashem has so now when the Zohar, when Rebbe Lazar begins to explain to Reb Chia what the secret of the 29 days, of these 22 days, he says the first thing is that Hashem uncovers his left hand, which is Hashem revealed his left hand, which is the idea of Rosh Hashanah. So literally the rock in the desert, that's that left hand. And he's going to show how that verse, Chasaf Hashem Ezroa Kacho, contains within itself these 3 gevuras. The 3 gevura that we spoke about earlier. The 3 times Elokim. S, the word S, hu gevura de Malchus. The word S is the gevura of the word of Malchut. Because we know that the letters of the Aleph Beis, Aleph through Taf, Malchus is speech, so Malchus has letters. So the word S, which is the Aleph through Taf, is referring to Malchus. But basically, I'm going to explain what he's saying now. He's going to explain as when the Zohar starts to say how Rosh Hashanah is the time when the Gevurah starts kicking in, when God is bestowing and extending his left hand. He brings a verse where it says God extended his holy arm. He's going to show you how in that word, God extended his holy arm, the word Es Zeroa Kacho, his holy arm, is indicative of these 3 levels of Elokim, these 3 Gevurot that happen on Rosh Hashanah. The Gevurah of Malchut, the Gevurah of the Ze'er Anpin, and the Gevurah of Bina. Now, by the way, I forgot to mention, you see from the whole process we just said, that the Gevurah comes from the Hevel. It's the sound of the shofar. And then half of it goes to him, and half goes to her. You see how this whole structure working, that there's the 3 Gevuras. The Samach Gimel, the 63, which is the 7 times 63, and it's 7 times 37, because you're only doing the Miloi. That's the Gevuras of Samach Gimel. That's the Gevurah of Bina. Then it becomes 260, and then it splits. Half to him is the Gevurah of Ze'er Anpin. Half to her is the Gevurah of Malchut. And it's hinted to in the word Es Zeroa Kacho. Why? Es, he explains, is Malchus, because the letters of the Aleph Beis is from Aleph through Taf, and that's Malchus. S is always Malchus. S ugvura de Malchus, hanikra S. Malchus is called S. And now he takes it even further. Not only is S Malchut, but S is also showing on the gevura of Malchut. On the gevura that is in Malchut. Why? Because you can take the Aleph and the Taf, and the Aleph you can read as Elef, which is 1,000. So Aleph usually is 1. But if you spell the word Aleph, you have the word Elef. Elef means 1,000. Taf is 400. So Aleph and Taf together could be 1,400. 1,000 plus 400. Aleph Taf. What's that? We know that amongst the letters of the Aleph Beis, there are 5 letters that indicate the 5 gevurot, the 5 power of gevura. Those are all the letters that have a double. And they're called menatzpach. Mem, nun, tzadik, pei, chaf. The 5 letters menatzpach, these are the 5 gevura letters. Now, mem, nun, tzadik, pei, chaf is the numeric value 280. Which, by the way, is Gematria, the word par. Par is an ox. And an ox is on the left side of the chariot, which shows on Gevura. So par is an animal that indicates Gevura, a lot of Gevura. That's why we take para aduma, a red par. Par is 280. It's the letters mem, nun, tzadik, pei, chaf, menatzpach. If you make the numbers 5 times 280. Why are we doing it 5? Because each one of these 5 menatzpachs, letters, have all 5 inside of them. So you have to make 5 times 5. 5 times menatzpach. 280 times 5 is 1,400. So in the word S, which could be read Elef, Taf, it represents the 5 times menatzpach, which is the sum totality of gevura, as it is in Malchus, which is the world of letters, the world of speech. Hey pamim menatzpach shu hey gevura shekol echad kol mehei. I am bekavana ata gibor lo'olam Hashem. Look in Arizal, which the intentions to have on the word ata gibor. Gibor is gevura. What's the first word? Ata gibor. Ata is Aleph and Taf. So over there it probably says Aleph and Taf is 14, and the Hey is indicating of the five gevuros is the Hey from the word Ata, and Aleph and Taf are 1,400, which is the 5 times menatzpach, and that's gibor. La'olam ado Aleph Daled Nun Yud. I think it says Aleph Daled Nun Yud. Is the name Adonai, which is the name of Malchut. So that's the word S. It says God stretched out, S, Zroya. Zroya is his arm. Which arm? Can be the right arm or the left hand. So he says Zroya Yad Smol, that's the left arm. That's referring to the next level of Gevura. Gevura Deza, the Gevura of the Ze'er Anpin, which is Pachad, the dread, Pachad Yitzchak, the dread of Yitzchak, like we discussed earlier. Shudina Kashya, which is harsh judgments. But it says, Chasaf Hashem Es Zroya Kodsho, his Holy One. Kodsho, Holy One, is Bina. Now, even though we learned earlier that Kodesh is in Chachma, Kadisha Ilah is Bina. Kodesh is in Chachma. Here suddenly we're saying Chasaf Hashem Zroya Kodsho is in Bina. So he says there are references in Zohar that the Bina is also called Kodesh. Usually we say that Bina is called Tahar, pure but not Kodesh. Kodesh is only in Chachma. That's why Kahanim are called Kodesh, because Kahanim are the energy of Chachma, and the Levites are the energy of Bina, is Tahara, only Tahar, pure but not holy. Holiness means is more than pure, it's transcendence. But he's going to prove over here that there is an element of Kodesh that refers to Bina as well. Ki b'kedusha hu b'leviim. Because by the Levites, there's also Kedusha. I am Bereya Mehemna, Parshas Baloscha. So it says openly in the Zohar, Parshas Baloscha. In other words, even though usually it's not this way, but in Reya Mehemna, which is a passage of the Zohar in Parshas Baloscha, it associates Kedusha with the Levites, and we know the Levites are rooted in the left side in Bina. Nafkuf Nun Beis Amud Beis, Ube Ma'ore Or Mereches Tahira, in the book Ma'ore Or, which is a Kabbalistic encyclopedia on the word Tahara, or Mereches Kedusha, Ube Yud Nun Sham, which is, I think, Ye'er Nesiv, which is an explanation on it, where over there he explains how sometimes we reference Kedusha on the Levium as well, in Bina as well. So when the word Chasaf Hashem Ezroya Kachai, it's actually indicating these three Gevuras. Es is the lowest Gevura of Malchus. Zroa is the Gevura of the left hand, which is the Gevura of the Ze'er Anpin. And Kacho is the Gevura of Bina. Or Yesh Loimar, or he wants to say that even if you're not comfortable putting the word Kacho, that Kacho is Bina, because usually Kodesh is Chachma. So perhaps, he says, in the word Zeroa itself, it indicates both Gevuras, the Gevura of Ze'er Anpin and the Gevura of Bina. Oyesh Laima B'Tevas Zeroya Nirmas Bina Gamkein. You have Bina as well. Ki Zeroya, because the word Zeroa, Gematria, Bina Gevura. The word Zeroa, let's see what the word Zeroa is. Zeroa is 285. Zeroa is 285. And Gevura is 216. 216 plus Bina is 67 plus 67 equals 283. 1 second. No, something was off over here. Gevura is 216 plus Bina, which is 67, plus 67. It's 283. So now let's go back to the word Zeroa. Maybe I was wrong on Zeroa. I was wrong. Zeroa is 283. Because Reish Ayin is 270. Zayin and Vav is 13. I was thinking Zayin and Vav. 7 and 6, this time of the night, I was thinking it's 15. But 7 and 6 is 13. So Zeroa is 283, which is the numeric value of Bina and Gevura. So in the word Zeroa, S is the Gevura of Malchus, and Zeroa, it could include the next two levels of Gevura. And in corresponding to these three Gevuras, Amar Reb Elazar Gimel Shainis. So when Reb Elazar starts to explain to Reb Chia what is the energy of Rosh Hashanah, he begins that on Rosh Hashanah, he tries to explain to him what is the sequence of the 21 days leading up to Shmini Atzeres. He brings the verse Chasaf Hashem Ezroa Kacha, that God stretches out his left hand. And then he says, over here, he says that in this hand, Beit Talia Yeshua, in it is dependent salvation. Beit Talia Nukma, in this hand is dependent revenge. Beit Talia Purkana, and in this hand is hanging, it's dependent, is the root of redemption. So salvation, vengeance, and redemption. So he's going to explain how these three elements are these three levels of Gevura. From the Gevura of Malchut comes Yeshua, because the word Yeshua, salvation, is related to Gevura. When we say Ana Hashem Hoshiyana, we need a Yeshua, salvation, that's coming. There's a certain intensity to that. When you look in the Kabbalistic encyclopedia on the word Yeshua, what a Yeshua means, he says over here in this Sefer, Ma'ore Or, on the word Yeshua. Number one, he has a few entrances, a few Yeshua Mitzad Bina. Yeshua is on the side of Bina, which Bina is Gevura. Okay. Yeshua Gematria Hashchina is the same numeric value of the word Shechina, which is Malchus, which is also full of Gevura. Imakola. Malchus is, that's why we say by Malchut, we say Kais Yeshuais, the cup of Yeshua. Malchus is called a Kais, a cup. Kos is Gematria 86, which is Malchus, Elokim. Kais Yeshua is a cup of salvation. So Yeshua is associated to Gevura, but which Gevura? The Gevura from Malchus. So that's why he says, the Beital Yeshua, okay, Yeshua, Gevura is the Malchus, is the Gevura of Malchus, which is called Dina Rafia. It's called the light judgments. Because the Gevura of higher up, the Gevura of the Ze'er Anpin is harsher, is more intense. He says, Kais Yeshua is because salvation doesn't feel like Gevura. It feels like a salvation is a good thing. But there's a certain intensity to it. Nukma, vengeance. That's where punishment to the wicked comes from. That's from the harsh judgments. Medina Kashya, the Pachad Yitzchak. That's coming from the Gevura of the male side, the Gevura of Yitzchak, which is very intense. Gevura Dezah, which is the Gevura of the Zeirap, the second time Elokim. The third level is redemption. We know all redemption comes from Bina. That's why Bina is called Yovel. Yovel is what happens on the Jubilee year. Everybody's freed. And Yovel is the 50th year. The number 50 is associated with Bina, 50 gates of Bina. Perkana sheyotzia lecheres, and it says 50 times Yetzias Mitzrayim in the Torah. Because the entire Yetziat Mitzrayim is, the energy is from Bina, where you go out, where redemption is. Sheyotzia lecheres, megvura is the Bina, which comes from the Gevura of Bina. Ki Bina, when the sages say that when it says Hakela Gadol, Gadol means God, the sages associated that with creation of the worlds. Hagibor, the sages say, is Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's when the Gevura came. But which Gevura? The Gevura of Bina. Ki Bina hu Alma Dechera is the world of freedom. So that is the rock. Let's go back to the rock. The Tanra, the rock, which is Gematria 3 times Elokim, is indicative of all these 3 levels that are there in Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, we said the Binyan HaMalchus is from the 3 times Elokim. From the left hand of Hashem, Chasaf Hashem Ezroya Katre, all of that was hinted to in the rock. But he wasn't sitting on a rock. He was sitting under the shade of the rock. And he was enjoying the shade from the rock. The shade is the second half of the month of Tishrei. It's when we sit in the shade of God. Va'atzila hu kamayatzel the sukkah is the shade of the sukkah. Kamayshakasev, what does it say? The sukkah tia letzel yoimam. That the sukkah will be by day for a shade. Why do they have a sukkah? To protect them from the intense sun heat in the desert. And we also know that the sukkah is corresponding to the Yanane Akave, the clouds of glory that protected them from the sun heat. And so therefore it's referring to sukkahs. But the very important point over here is that which is the kindness of God. You're sitting in God's kindness. The opposite of the Gur. Remember we said that the pendulum swings. In the second half of the month of Tishrei, we're experiencing God's love, no more God's judgment. But you can't attain the love if you don't first go through it's the right hand of God that embraces me. But in our case, the shade came from the rock. The shade came from the rock. You find that the entire sukkah is made up from the energy of Rosh Hashanah. Where do we find that? When the Torah speaks about blowing a shofar on Rosh Hashanah, in Psalms, it doesn't say it in the Pasuk, but in the Psalms it says, Psalm 80. It's the one we say on Thursday. I think it's 84, or it's not 83 for sure, not. Maybe it's 85 or 86. Over there it says, Tiku b'chodesh shofar. Maybe, no, I think it's 82. Tiku b'chodesh shofar. Blow in the new month, which is the new year, blow with a shofar. Ba'keseh, when it's concealed. Sages learn out that this is referring to the Yom Tov of Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah is the only holiday where the moon is concealed. Ba'keseh, because Rosh Hashanah comes down at the beginning of a month. The moon is concealed. Ba'keseh means concealment. So the Yom Tov of Rosh Hashanah is called Ba'keseh. If you take the word Ba'keseh and you rearrange the letter, you rearrange the order, you get the word Basukkah. That means that the sukkah comes from the keseh. Keseh is the distance. God is hiding from us, and that's what creates this concealment and the judgment and all of that. But in Sukkot, that very hiding and that very toughness suddenly switches over to an incredible divine loving embrace. That's the sukkah. So he's showing you how the shade comes from the rock. Yukamoy min ba'keseh the Rosh Hashanah nase ba'sukkah becomes the sukkah. The same letters, b'chag ha'sukkos and sukkos. Ikiyadu, as it is also known. Now the main part of a sukkah is the schach. The schach is what we put on the roof of the sukkah, which gives us the shield, the tzeil, the shade. Now, schach is spelled samach chav chav, which is Gematria 100. Samach is 60, chaf and chaf is 20, 20 is Gematria 100. So that means the schach is 100. 100 what? 100 energies of kindness. Where are they coming from? That produces the shade. From where? From the 100 sounds that we blow on the shofar. On Rosh Hashanah, we're supposed to hear every day of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah in Israel, it's one day. No, it's actually in Israel also 2 days. But we're supposed to hear 100 sounds. The 100 sounds of the shofar translate and become the spiritual energy of the schach. Elsewhere, he says, he doesn't say it here, it's not just in general, it's also specific. In the 100 sounds of the shofar, there is 60 tekiyot. Tekiyot, the shofar is made up of 3 sounds. Tekiah is a single sound. A shavarim is a broken sound. And teruah is like a person weeping and sobbing. So in the 100 sounds that we blow on Rosh Hashanah, there is 60 tekiyot, 20 shivarim, and 20 teruot. Counted go look in the, and that's how you have the 100. So the word schach is not just Gematria 100, but it's samach 60, showing us that the entire schach in the sukkah is perfectly coming from, in other words, the left hand of God translates into the right hand. In general, their gevura, that makes up the schach of the sukkah. Now, one more. I'm going to stop over here, even though we're still in the middle over here. We're going to continue in the next class. The word shofar, if you switch out the letters of shofar with the atbash system. Atbash is a system in Gematria. It's not so much numbers, but more like exchange of letters, where the first letter of the aleph bet switches with the last letter. The aleph can exchange with a taf. The second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the beis, switches with the second to the last letter, the shin. The third letter, the gimel, switches with the third to the last letter, which is the resh. Each letter switches with the opposite. In other words, you're reading the aleph beis frontwards and backwards. And everyone that has the same number in that line can switch with each other. If you take the word shofar and you switch it with atbash, the shin of the shofar becomes a beis. Right? The vav of the shofar is a pei. because the pei is the sixth letter going back from taf, going back as a pei. So the vav, which is the sixth letter in the front, switches with a pei. So you have a beis and a pei. And then the pei of the shofar switches with a vav. So your beis, pei, vav. And the resh of the word shofar is the third letter, switches with a gimel. Gives you the word bipug. Beis, pei, vav, gimel. So the switch of the other side of the shofar, which means switching the letters with the atbash, give you a word called bipug, which if you do the gematria of the word bipug, which into this one, beis is 2, pei is 80, is 82, plus vav and gimel is 9. 9 plus 82 is 91. Sukkah is Gematria 91. That means the Sukkah is literally the other side of the shofar, the Atbash. Gematria Sukkah. Let's stop over here. Showing us that what? That the shade that he sat under the rock, if the rock is the shofar, then the shade is the Sukkahs. And this setting in the desert, we're going to see in the next class, is where all this was discussed, because that's where these secrets are revealed, as we'll soon see. Bezrat Hashem. Okay, we'll end over here because I'm falling asleep, and you might be as well. And enough secrets for today. Bezrat Hashem.